In today's video, we are going to explore the Stafford Gambit, and we will be doing this by exploring 3 chess master games. We will start off with Moritz Gressman, a Canidate master rated 2400, and his exploration of the Stafford Gambit. Then we're going to look at the famous Eric Rosen, an international master who actually went ahead and made the Stafford Gambit as popular as it is today. Then finally, we will look at Grandmaster Fabiano Caruana. He went ahead, took Eric Rosen's Stafford Gambit, and played it to absolute perfection in a very famous game that we will look at the very end. These 3 Chessmaster games will help fully explain the Stafford Gambit, so I really do hope you enjoy. So as promised, we start off with Canidate master Moritz Gressman, and the way you start off the Stafford Gambit is simply just after e4, we play e5. Very common, but after knight to f3, we immediately play the tricky knight f6, sacrificing the pawn. Here, taking the pawn is not a bad move by white, and we play knight to c6. Our opponent very incentivized to take that knight because he is up a pawn, but we do have some nice compensation here. Notice that our bishops are wide open and ready to attack. The queen is also very open, and our development's literally complete after only a couple of moves at the expense of 1 pawn. After d3, which is the best move, we go ahead and play bishop to c5, the most defining move in the Stafford Gambit, targeting the weak f2 square. Alexander Katz, the opponent in this situation, goes ahead and plays bishop to e2, trying to castle as quickly as possible, and we play h5. Another very defining move in the Stafford Gambit, looking to attack the king side with both the bishop, a pawn storm, and possibly even a rook lift, going to g6 and attacking the king on g2. In this situation, Katz plays c3, looking to push the bishop away with d4. Moritz Gressman notices this pawn push is on the way and plays bishop to b6, simply just defending the threat and keeping the bishop locked in on f2. Katz aggressively pushes the pawn to e5 and the knight goes to g4. Taking the knight is not a good idea for Katz, so instead simply just d4, blocking the bishop off from the attack on f2. Here, Gressman plays c5, looking to open up that attack on f2 once again. Katz, noticing that f2 would be a major weakness, plays h3, trying to kick the knight away. In this situation, Moritz Gressman plays an idea that many of you will be able to play when you go for the Stafford Gambit, this idea, knight to f2. The whole point is that after the king takes back, we play c takes d, and now, after one more take, the bishop will be eyeing down the king. Alexander Katz does not defend this correctly, playing bishop to f3 instead, and here, d takes c, discover check on the king. The best move here to maintain your advantage is king to g3, a very counterintuitive move that most players will not go for. Instead, Katz plays the more principled but worse move, king e2, and here the queen comes out to h4, threatening f2. Here Alexander Katz plays knight takes pawn. This is not a great move because we just play queen to f2, and here the king is going to be walked to the center of the board. Here comes bishop to f5. The best move is for the king to move over to c4, but here we have rook to d8. No need to long castle, pressuring the queen on the d-file, threatening queen to d4, which will subsequently be checkmate as well. Here, Katz desperately tries to trade off queens, but we have bishop to e6, absolutely brutal. Bishop goes to defend, but after bishop takes check, notice that the knight is overloaded because if knight takes bishop here, queen takes queen, and we've lost that queen, and this is going to be game over very shortly. Noticing this threat, if you played something like king to d3 instead, notice the absolutely brilliant bishop to b3 is played, blocking off these 2 crucial squares, discovered check with the rook. After knight defends, we have queen d4, check and mate. This is game over. Absolutely beautiful performance by Moritz Gressman. For our next game, we're going to go over Eric Rosen, the founder of the Stafford Gambit, playing against a Grandmaster Sergei Ehrenberg. And this situation is the exact same setup as last time. Notice here that after a series of moves, we sacrifice the pawn, knight to c6. Ehrenberg accepts this gambit, and we go ahead and play bishop to c5, attacking that weak f2 square. Just like the last game, bishop e2 is played, looking for the castle very quickly, but after h5, Ehrenberg makes the mistake of playing h3, trying to prevent the knight from getting to g4. As we saw in the last game, knight to g4 was a very strong move, allowing extra pressure on the f2 square. However, in this situation, Eric Rosen shows why h3 is actually a blunder, and that is because of queen to d4. This is a very straightforward attack, but believe it or not, this is very difficult to deal with. Notice that this is checkmate in 1. The best move here is actually rook to f1, giving up this pawn for free, and in this situation you just survive, but notice that there is this triple attack on the f2 square, and not many players would go and play like this. That's because the more simple move is just the castle. Notice that you are defending this f2 square, but you are actually developing as well. The issue is you are locking yourself into a very weak king side that has a beautiful attack orchestrated by Eric Rosen. Here, knight to g4 sacrifice anyway, because after the pawn takes, you are in some serious trouble. The best move here is actually bishop takes, pawn takes back. Not many players would play this way because, of course, g to h is coming, and if you take here, you end up opening up the h file anyway. Grandmaster Sergey Ehrenberg accepts this gambit, playing h takes g back, and now look at this h file wide open. This is going to be a very scary attack to deal with. Sergey Ehrenberg plays g3 because in this situation he wants to give his king some space to breathe. Rosen quickly capitalizes by playing queen to e5. Notice here that if you played something like, let's say, I don't know, knight to d5, queen takes, and this is actually checkmate. That is because this pawn cannot take back due to the pin with the bishop. The rook is covering the h file, and there's no way to block g2, preventing the checkmate. This is an immediate threat that must be defended, so Sergey Ehrenberg plays king to g2, defending his pawn with the king. In this situation, queen to h5 is a tempting move, but completely loses the advantage that Eric Rosen has built up. Rook h1, in this situation you are forced to trade off pieces, down a minor piece already. You will lose this game in a slow grind. So what Eric Rosen does next is absolutely legendary. Bishop sack on f2, another brilliant move, because here, after the rook takes, the queen can then go over to h5, and notice that you cannot put the rook on h1 anymore, and if you put the queen on h1, it's just checkmate right there on the spot. Queen cannot go to h1 here. This is a serious problem because this is going to be checkmate after queen to h2, queen to h1, and there's going to be no escape for our opponent. Sergey Ehrenberg, clinging to life, plays bishop to f3, which isn't as ridiculous as it may seem because of queen check. King moves over, and now the bishop is blocking h1. Of course, we can just take that bishop, and after queen takes back, we just play queen to h1 anyway, and this is still checkmate. There is no way to get out of this position alive. Now, like I said, the Stafford Gambit got so popular that pretty much everybody played it, including Grandmaster Fabiano Caruana. In this situation, we see a very familiar setup, e4, e5, and after the knight comes to f3, we sacrifice the pawn. And here we go, the same exact exchange as last time with bishop to c5, and the f2 pawn is under attack. Like I said, bishop to e2 is unanimously the best move here, preparing the castle, and we see h5. What I want you to notice is that in every game we've looked at today, this position is played exactly the same. The bishop on c5 attacking f2, the pawn push with the h file and the rook. Open up position for all of our pieces, ready to attack in a multitude of different ways. What's different here is Artur Gabrielin's approach is very fascinating. He plays d3, we go knight to g4, he takes the knight, allowing the h-file to be wide open. But here, he is planning a different approach. Like I said, bishop to f4, we played bishop to e6, and after queen to d2, he's going to long castle. Fabiano Caruana does not want a short castle here because that would be a disaster for him. So queen to e7. Long castle, and we end up in this fascinating game where both sides are long castled and the rook is on the d file, eyeing down the queen. Here, king to b1 is a very worthwhile move since a2 tends to be a weak square that can be under attack in many positions, and here, b6. Even though Fabiano Caruana is castled on the same side as his opponent, he's still looking for a queenside attack. He's played b6, his king will go b7, and he's going to push a5 and a4, looking to open up the king side. Bishop backs up to g3 because the queen is looking to go to f4 and possibly attack the c7 square, which could be a weakness in Fabiano's position. Here we play king to b7, the queen is defending c7, and we're not too worried about this attack just yet. And so, rook to e1. Fabiano plays a5, preparing his queenside pawn push as well. Knight to e2, and he is preparing a pawn push on the d file, even possibly a pawn push on the f file. Continuing along, the pawn goes to a4, and after knight to f4, Fabiano backs the bishop up, not looking to give up a very useful piece. And here, Artur Gabrielin finishes off, stops the push, a3. Now that pawn isn't going to approach any further. Rook to e8. If you were ever defending the Stafford Gambit, I believe Artur Gabrielin's approach here was absolutely incredible. After c3, a possible b4 push, also a possible d4 push, and this is trouble for Fabiano. He finds a great move, b5. The bishop can now back up to b6, and this is a great square. Also defending c7, just in case the queen comes to f4. Here comes the push by Artur, and here we just back up, knight to d3, and now the bishop comes back to e6, and here, queen to f4. The attack is here, it is ready, but it is defended very well by Fabiano. And we play g5, pushing the queen back, and then developing our kingside attack now. Artur chooses to play f3, trading off some pawns, and now we go for bishop b3. The first advantage of the game for Fabiano Caruana, because he forces this rook that is on a very good square on d1, over to c1. Fabiano then plays bishop to f7, which seems like an odd move, but he's preparing queen to e6, which would be a very devastating checkmating tactic. Knight over to b4 is a great defense, because after queen to e6, notice that you can no longer hit checkmate. There's also an escape route for the king if need be. Artur continues pushing with d5, and after pawn takes back, notice the rook is eyeing down the queen, the pawn is also attacking the queen, but simply just queen to f5, checking the king. King just moves over, and now the rooks trade. Rook takes back, and here bishop takes. Fabiano finally wins back that pawn, and in this situation, it is looking very good for him. Artur does not want to trade down, instead playing rook to d1. Here, c6, adding defense to the bishop. Notice that c4 is not possible since the pawn can just take back. Queen slides back to e2, and in this situation, we bring our bishop back to e6. This is soliciting a trade of rooks. Bishop takes back, and in this situation, queen to d2, attacking the bishop. However, absolutely beautiful move, the brilliant move that wins the game for Fabiano Caruana. Queen f3, because after the queen takes the bishop back, queen f1 check, and notice the bishop is blocking a2. After the bishop and the queen back up, this is just a back rank checkmate. Therefore, this pawn here in f3 is completely lost. You cannot take the bishop back. You must instead create space for the king to escape. Here, the bishop retreats back to b6. Excellent square. The queen can't go to d7 because of this bishop. So in this situation, king just over to b2, getting that space. Pawn takes. Knight moves over, getting closer to the center of the board, and here, queen to e3. Believe it or not, Fabiano is up a ton of material now, and trading off queens is not a good idea. He moves the queen back, and here, another brilliant move. Bishop g4, a diversion tactic. If the queen takes back, which he does, queen takes knight here, and notice that queen to c2 will be a forced checkmate. In this situation, king takes pawn, thinking, okay, no more queen c2. Fabiano is like, that is fine with me. Queen b1, just as checkmate, guys. All of these squares are covered. All the back squares are covered. There is nowhere for our opponent to go. Fabiano Caruana uses the Stafford Gambit in a Grandmaster Showdown, winning the game. And that's it, guys. Based on these tools that you've developed by watching this video, you should be able to actually devour your opponents when playing the Stafford Gambits. And if you did like this video, I am attaching 2 more right here with the exact same format that you can use in order to master those openings as well. Stay classy, my friends. Until next time.